Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, and thank you. My name is Joe West. I am a partner in Duane Morris's trial group. I work in the D.C. office, and more than a few people have expressed condolences to me on that one thus far tonight. Condolences which I accept readily. I also serve on the firm's partners board, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the firm as well. I will tell you that one of my duties as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the firm is to chair the firm's firm-wide Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And before we get started tonight, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you that the firm actually lost a member of our family yesterday. There's a lawyer by the name of Chuck Shields. Chuck is a partner in the wealth planning group in our Boca Raton office. I had the privilege of serving with Chuck as a member, very active member of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee. He died suddenly yesterday at the age of 43. Chuck was an exceptional human being, an outstanding lawyer, not just active, as I've indicated, with diversity and inclusion within the firm, but also in his community in Boca and nationwide. He served as a board member of our fund, an organization very active in LGBT causes in South Florida and throughout the country. He is survived by his partner, Thomas Keenan, and by his mother, Gloria Shields. And so I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment for us just to pause and reflect on our friend, our brother, our partner, Chuck Shields. Thank you very much. And Chuck would say, Joe, get on with it. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm always privileged to come out to our San Francisco office, mainly because it has the nicest views of any of the offices, and all of the Duane Morris people are nodding vigorously. But I also, in a lot that's going on, and you didn't come to hear me speak, but I have to say this. Colin Kaepernick is one of my fraternity brothers, and I just have to tell you, okay, there's another Kaepernick man. When I think about him and what he's done, and I hear people criticize him, I think about all the criticism that athletes get, that they're not role models, that they're not active, they're not doing anything positive. And there's a saying, I wish I could say that I coined the phrase, I did not, but I use it liberally, that if you make money, you should make change. Because money is silent, but change makes noise. And so God bless him for, in the privileged position that he's in, still exposing himself to ridicule and even the loss of his opportunity to make a living, to make a statement. And so everyone else who has the courage and the wisdom to do the same, and that can be said of everyone you will hear from today, they have my undying respect and admiration. And to that end, I want to introduce my partner, another of the partners at Duane Morris, and someone for whom I have the utmost respect. You know, part of my duty is to oversee the work of the inclusion committees for the respective offices in the firm. And every month when we have our call of our firm-wide diversity committee, it reminds me of, you know, if you're a parent, you're not supposed to have a favorite child, right? But if you ask any of the other members of the diversity committee which office is my favorite when it comes to diversity and inclusion work, they'll go, San Francisco. You know? And it got to the point where I just say it now, you know? And so the co-chairs of the effort here, Lisa Spiegel and Terrence Evans, are two of the people I have tremendous respect for. Terrence, you'll hear from first. He is, as I indicated, the co-chair of the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. He is also vice chair of the firm's banking practice for the Western United States. He is so active throughout the bar infrastructure and biosphere in the American Bar Association, the National Bar Association, which named him one of its 40 best lawyers under 40. He's active with the Minority Corporate Counsel Association, an organization that I previously served as the CEO of that organization, being named to its next gen board of directors. And Terrence is just an outstanding individual who has won numerous awards, widely published, and has a tremendous track record as a trial lawyer. He's also just one heck of a nice guy. And so I want to introduce you to my friend and our partner, Terrence Evans. Terrence?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I think I can speak loudly enough. Okay,
You probably can.
I can probably speak loudly enough so that you all can hear me, but I'll be brief. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, the amazing Yolanda Jackson, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here. Very excited that this is the 5th year in a row that we've been able to do this citywide diversity program. I got the idea for this program several years ago when I needed an elimination of bias MCLE credit. I had about 60 MCLE credits, but I was missing the elimination of bias, and I went on the PLI website, and there was one program there. And one of the stars of that program was Yolanda Jackson. And at the time, I was just a young associate, but I say one day, when I grow up, I want to do a program with Yolanda Jackson. And thank you so much for the last 5 years in a row we've been doing this program. I also want to thank the firm, and I want to thank Joe West for his incredible leadership, because it takes money to put on this event, to buy the food, to pay the videographer. And there are a lot of firms who are not willing to make that type of financial commitment, especially with budget cuts all over. But Joe West, and under his leadership, this firm has made great strides in the area of diversity and inclusion and has never let up. And I'm just so grateful, Joe, for your leadership. I'm grateful for the firm, and I'm grateful for all of you to be here, because if you were not here, all of our efforts would be for naught. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Yolanda Jackson. She is the executive director and the general counsel of the Bar Association of San Francisco, and she's been tireless on issues of diversity and inclusion, not just here in San Francisco, but throughout the state and around the country. I could go on and on about her incredible accomplishments as a professor, as a litigator, as an executive of the Bar Association, but I want you to hear from her, and you'll hear from our great panel shortly thereafter. Thanks again for being here.
I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, and I can't tell you how happy that makes me, because that means you come back every year to learn more and to hear the new spin, if you will, that Terrence puts on this topic by bringing current events to the forefront as we talk about the issues that really haven't changed. It's just different examples coming up every year that lead us to a different conversation around them. So what I'm going to do this evening to line up with the theme that he's created is to talk a little bit about the history of workplace bias, because there is a statutory history to why we see what we see in the workplace. I'm going to bring you up to speed with the data in California related to the general public and attorneys and judges. The data's changed slightly, some positive, some negative. And then a little bit about the difference between implicit bias and racism and the science behind it. I'm not going to go into detail. You're not getting a full lecture on science, but you will walk away with an understanding that each one of us has biases. It's automatic, and the only way to stop it is to be intentional about it and to think about it and to retrain yourself to do things differently. So let me share a few facts and data points about the history of workplace bias and discrimination. There was a study on workplace disparity and race done by Sidney Spivak and the American Sociological Association. So in principle, the labor market is supposed to be race blind. The fact is that there are key indicators and an examination of factors that influence workplace decisions, such as race and ethnicity, and they play a significant role in determining who gets promoted and who gets hired. There's roughly a 2-to-1 ratio in unemployment rates between African Americans and whites, 2-to-1, and that includes both males and females. And this statistic has been a constant throughout economic expansions and recessions, despite shrinking gaps in educational differences between the two groups. 1/3 of white men and nearly a half of Asian men are employed in managerial, professional, and related occupations, compared to 1/5 of African Americans and 1/7 of Hispanic men. According to sociological research, occupational discrimination helps to explain the persistent wage gaps between whites and both African Americans and Hispanics, especially when it comes to women. Research finds that education and skills play a role but do not fully explain the placement of groups in the queue and the historical disparities between whites and racial minorities. This disparity relates to earnings, labor force participation, training, and promotions. So one big area that leads to disparate treatment is when employers place a lot of emphasis on soft skills. So any of you who've done recruiting before, you know what that means. Assessing soft skills is subjective. It's an evaluation that happens without objectivity. It includes judging characteristics such as how individuals look, how they dress, the manner of how they speak, and whether or not they're cheerful when they show up to the interview or come to the workplace. So studies have cited that in this report, that it suggested that employers perceive African American males, whether or not they interview them, as having limited soft skills. They are perceived as intimidating, hostile, and defensive. This emphasis on soft skills can result in race and ethnicity-based discrimination in hiring and promotion. Here are a few historical facts on which disparity in the United States is based. Before the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, widespread and open institutional discrimination denied people of color access to many employment opportunities. Although the Equal Pay Act of 1963 mitigated wage disparities between whites and people of color, it did not eliminate them, because historical hiring practices, educational inequalities, and workplace discrimination continue to affect how people got paid. In the post-civil rights era, post-1964, the decline in manufacturing jobs in the 70s and the 80s had racially differential consequences for blue-collar workers, which led to a wage gap between more and less educated men. The unemployment rate for African American men in 1983 during the recession hit a high of 20%. Corporate downsizing and restructuring in the 1990s led to displacement and job losses that were unevenly distributed by race, ethnicity, and gender. So basically, people of color and women lost their jobs at a higher rate. While there are years of patterns of unequal opportunities for African Americans and Latinos in the job market, many researchers believe that much of this has to do with discrimination in the public education system. I know you all have heard that before. Studies based on census data found that race and ethnicity accounted for more of the earning gaps between whites and minorities than differences in education and work experience. Education and skill are not the differentiators here, as many might try to argue. Studies also show that while employers do consider measurable skills when ranking workers, stereotyping, discrimination, cronyism, and information hiring networks all affect employment outcomes and promotion outcomes. Discrimination is hard to measure. However, studies based on self-reporting and on objective audit techniques have helped sociologists to evaluate how bias does result in workplace disparities. Audits have also found that African American men with identical qualifications as white men are denied job opportunities in a significant portion of test cases, and that Hispanics with better credentials than whites are significantly less likely to even get to an interview. Just as a note, many of you have seen these tests, I'm sure, but these tests have been done in law practices and in the legal profession, and the results are the same. So, again, for those of you who are responsible for recruiting and hiring, please take note. Okay, so, the PowerPoint is going to take us through, again, updated data regarding what our general population in California looks like, the population of minority versus white attorneys and minority versus white judges. Minority, for the first time, also through the Judicial Council data, will include LGBT statistics and disability statistics for judges. So here is what the State Bar has projected for the year 2020 in terms of what, can you guys see that?
Yes.
In terms of what the various minority groups look like in comparison to the population. We don't have to go back to 1990, but for 2020, I would like to point out that the Latino population is projected to be about 40% in California. Right now, there's a 5.6% law percentage for lawyers that are Latino. API is expected to expand to 14% for the population, with about half of those becoming lawyers, or the percentage of the practice, I should say, 7.4. And then African Americans, 6.1% population, 3.9 attorneys. Again, on this chart, what I really want to point out is that there has been very little change between 2001 and 2011. African American attorneys, 2.4, now 2.7. 3.7 Latinos, 4.2. 6.0 API, 7.7 today, or 2011. And the total minorities all combined, 17% in 2001, 20% in 2011. I also want to point out that minorities are 60% of the population in California. Okay, let's move on to judges. So the population in California, 40% white, 6% African American, 13% API, 38% Latino, 69% white judges. 7% African American. It compares to the population better than any of the other data points. APA, 7% on the bench, and Latinos, 38% of the population, 10% on the bench. The number of judges by race. So there's 1684 judges in the state, and that includes the Supreme Court, the Appellate Court, and the trial courts. And this just breaks down the numbers. Most telling to me is the female-male breakdown, when we know that half of the practice in California is women. And it's a pretty big disparity. Okay, so for the first time, gender identity and sexual orientation data. 66% of the bench self-identified as heterosexual. And I'm going to move down to the bottom to the number of people that did not respond to the question. Don't know why. Have no idea why. But 530 of the 1,100 of the 1684 who responded did not identify. 1 transgender, 2 bisexual, 25 gay, 22 lesbian throughout the state of California. Attorneys with disabilities, there's 8 in the entire state, and only at the trial court level. Okay, so I know we've gone over the county comparison before, and there are some counties that are just more troubling than others. So let's start with Napa. It's 41% minority, and they have less than 1% on the bench. It's basically 1 Latino attorney there. San Mateo, 54% diverse, 24% diversity on the bench. 1 Asian, 2 African Americans, 1 other race, and 2 that are mixed race. Solano County, 54%, and we have 2 Asian, 2 African Americans, 1 Latino on the bench. Sonoma, it's growing. This number wasn't this big before, 30% diverse with 1 Latino judge on the bench. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how this ties into Terrence's topic for the night. There are going to be a bunch of questions that tie into what's happening in our nation right now. It's going to tie into the Kaepernick issue. It's going to tie into DACA. And don't think that it's lost on anybody that these numbers around the Latino populations are not tied to what's happening with DACA and TPS and all of these other things that are meant to ship out hundreds of thousands of Latinos all at once. So Implicit bias is something that I think you all know is unconscious and it happens automatically. However, it's learned behavior. You're not born with biases and you're not born with racism. It is linked to the amygdala in the brain, which also ties to how we feel emotionally and how we react to things emotionally. So for example, if you see something that's suspicious, it's coming from your amygdala when you have that feeling that this doesn't seem right or this doesn't feel right, and it's automatic, you can't control it. It's also why we generalize things after a pattern and practice of hearing and seeing things a certain way. For example, why we all call Q-tips Q-tips no matter who made the cotton swab. Why we call the internet Google, right? So you just get used to these things, and again, it's automatic. You don't have time to stop and think about it typically before it comes out of your mouth. So it helps explain, though, where biases, including racism, stem from. By the age of 6, we develop unconscious associations with racial groups. I don't know if any of you read the book, Why Do All the Black Kids Sit at the Lunch Table Together? But at a very young age, because of fear and negative effects that we're taught, we start to figure out who looks like us and who we want to associate with. This also translates, though, into certain behaviors. Who you allow your children to hang out with, who you choose to marry. You're better at remembering faces of people who look like you or are part of your group, whatever that group is, than other groups or outside groups as they're called. And you tend to favor people within your own group. It's natural. So this all kind of operates like a human GPS system. Again, it just happens as you navigate the world every day and throughout the day. The brain is making these quick and uncontrolled automatic associations between concepts for you. But I do want to point out that implicit bias and racism are not interchangeable terms. So I don't know if you all remember during the VP debate last year, Mike Pence made a statement where he said certain segments of the population cannot be implicitly biased. And that's not a true statement. What I think he meant to do was to say that some people may not be racist, which is a true statement. There's a difference. Every human being has biases. Everybody in here, no matter what color, sexual orientation, gender you are, you have a way that your mind allows you to think about certain things. So how does implicit bias turn into racism? So we've been doing so much training lately around bias, and people have gotten comfortable thinking, well, I can't really do anything about that. I've been told it's just a natural thing that happens because I'm human. That's not true. Sorry, you guys. So let me give you an example of how people try to define actions as very innocent, but truly they are not. So Jesse Waters has a show called The Waters World Show, and he recently visited Chinatown in New York to film his show. And he thought it was funny and cute to make jokes about everybody's accents in Chinatown and that everybody there knows karate, even though karate is a Japanese discipline, not a Chinese discipline, and that all products there were made in China. And when he got criticized for it, Bill O'Reilly decided to say, it was just gentle fun. Why are you making such a big deal about it? Well, gentle fun is racism, my friends, and it can be. Just like hate crimes, just like derogatory name calling, just like intentionally choosing not to associate with certain groups of people because of fear or what you've heard, whatever the reason. Implicit bias is part of the foundation for racism, so they are connected, and one can lead to the other, but they're not a synonym for one another. Biases that can lead to racism can be consciously regulated through mindset training. Biases can be consciously regulated through mindset training. Just like anything else that we excel in life, we educate ourselves, we practice, we fail, we get better, we learn from our mistakes. This should be no different. As each individual human being, we should think of this as nothing different than everything else that we do that we want to be successful at in life. So let's look at, for example, excuses we've kind of made for ourselves as a society. We take sensitivity training, the 1 hour of elimination of bias training. We attend, we think we're cured. Yet, we continue to do the same reprehensible behavior with the same patterns. So here's an example. The study also showed that a lot of the culprits here were professionals who, again, I'm sure get bias training in the workplace. but Airbnb owners refusing to rent to people who don't look like them or people who they think are from groups that are less than them, and Uber customers refusing to properly tip drivers who they don't think look like them or who they think don't deserve the money. This is current day statistics and data. So unraveling hate and abject bias is a work in progress that we've been going through for many years and will continue to go through for many more years and generations. So racism arises when we feel threatened. We begin to draw boundaries around groups so that we can distinguish ourselves from other people. And so a couple of examples of how that looks in real life is a study that shows that white people express more negative attitudes toward Asian Americans when they perceive an economic threat. Non-black people perceive white males as a threat and dangerous. Many people are afraid of African American males. Police officers kill black and brown males at higher rates than any other races due to the perceived threat, which is the story we always hear after somebody gets shot. They were afraid for their lives, even though the person could have been running away. So one really quick piece that touches to those of us who practice law, there is a state bar rule that says you cannot discriminate as an attorney. That means you can't discriminate in your hiring or management of a practice. It also means you can't discriminate in promoting. And it also means that you cannot discriminate when you're taking on or terminating a client. And lawyers always freak out about that one, right? You mean I can't get rid of a client that I don't like? I just found out my client is LGBT and I don't want to represent them. Are you telling me I have to stick with them for that basis? The answer is yes. And so you can get a 10-second credit for this ethics review, right? To kind of cross over with your bias. But so I hope that this kind of tees up the conversation that you're going to hear from this amazing panel. That again, we'll talk about things like how we are comfortable with saying we have implicit bias, but we get squeamish when we talk about racism, but they can be really linked and one leads to the other if you don't catch it and fix it. And there are lots of real life examples happening in 2016 that I think you guys are going to be excited to hear this panel's opinion about. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to hearing from our group.
Well, that has, I think, set the table nicely. So with that, I'd like to introduce the members of the panel to come forward. Am I doing that? Just make sure. Okay. I will start with Willie Hernandez. Willie, raise your hand there, please. Willie is Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, where he leads a team providing all aspects of support to HPE's software, defined and cloud group, and the HPE Aruba business unit. Willie earned his law degree from UCLA and a Bachelor in Science degree from UC Berkeley. David Kelly. I mentioned to David earlier that he had my dream job, and I said, people say that to you all the time, right? And he says, until they know what it entails. David is in his 5th season with the Golden State Warriors, and no, he's not a swing guard to Steph Curry. Not yet. Not yet, he says. There's optimism. He is General Counsel, Vice President of Basketball Legal Affairs, and he serves as the team's Chief Legal Officer and manages a large number of business and legal matters in his portfolio, including the proposed new Sports and Entertainment Center in San Francisco's Mission Bay neighborhood. David received his bachelor's degree from Morehouse College, from the House, and his law degree from the University of Illinois College of Law. Ira Lamb is the former general counsel at Kabam Inc., where she led and managed global legal affairs for this industry leader in AAA console quality mobile games. Additionally, she provided legal guidance for the company's strategic business transactions, intellectual property portfolio and practices, corporate governance operations, and game development studio strategies. Ira is an NYU Law School graduate and has a BA in political science, also from UC Berkeley. I really want to spend the rest of the evening talking about Eva Patterson. And trust me, you would thank me for it. She is an absolute icon and legend. Eva is she is the co-founder and president of the Equal Justice Society. I really had a hard time cherry picking the best things to mention about her, but I'm gonna take a stab at a couple that just really blew my mind. She co-founded and chaired the California Civil Rights Coalition for 18 years, currently serves as the coalition's steering committee chair. She's a leading spokesperson in the campaigns against Proposition 107, anti-immigrant, Proposition 209, anti-affirmative action, and numerous other statewide campaigns against the death penalty, juvenile incarceration, and discrimination against lesbians and gay men. Is there a cause that Eva has not championed and championed well? This is my absolute favorite. As a 20-year-old student leader at the time of turmoil, Eva Patterson was catapulted into the national spotlight when she debated then Vice President Spiro Agnew on live television. Mademoiselle magazine named her one of the 10 young women of the year. She was featured on the covers of Ebony and Jet magazine and called to testify before Congress as a student. I feel like such a slacker. As a junior at Northwestern University, she became the first African-American president of the student body. Let's join this panel and say welcome. Now, you met Terrence Evans earlier. I'll introduce the other moderator of the panel, my partner, Lisa Spiegel. Lisa practices in the area of immigration and nationality law, concentrating on issues related to the employment of foreign nationals. She's been designated as a certified specialist on immigration, and turning the page here, on immigration law. She's the chair of the Northern California chapter of the Immigration Lawyers Association, a graduate of the Cardozo School of Law of Yeshiva University, as well as the State University of New York at Albany. And I will tell you that Lisa is one of my absolute favorite people at the firm. Yes, I said it again. So Lisa, come on up.
Okay. No
All right,
problem.
so what we're going to do, just so you all know, is Terrence and I are going to take turns asking some questions, but we realize there's a lot of issues we want to deal with immigration. And so my other hat is president of the board of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. And I'm going to actually answer some of those questions about DACA and what's going on in the world of immigration. And we're going to start off, though, with kind of our overview question, and we're going to have Terrence take it away.
So thanks all of you for being here, and I'm very happy for this amazing panel. I'm just so excited that we have all these super amazing people all at the same time. Just getting one of them would be incredible, but to have all of them together is awesome. We're going to try to cover a lot of material in a short period of time. There have been so many hot button issues, and as we were putting the questions together, it seemed like every day there's a new issue, and it's like, wow, we're going to go on forever. So we're going to try to cover as much as we can and give this panel a chance to give you some of their wisdom. So the concept of diversity and inclusion is often politicized. And in the August 9th, 2017 edition of Bloomberg Politics, there were some conversations with two different lawyers on the concept of diversity and inclusion. On behalf of the Heritage Foundation, there was a statement from a representative of that organization saying that diversity was simply a way to justify discrimination. And then on the other side, we had Eric Schneiderman, the New York Attorney General, saying that President Trump's policies were discriminatory and that he was going to use his platform as Attorney General to do whatever he could to protect diversity and inclusion. So our question to the panel is the concept of diversity and inclusion inherently discriminatory? And is there a way to bridge the political divide with respect to issues of diversity and inclusion? And I'm going to start with Eva, and we'll let all the rest of the panel chime in. And just for the record, all of the speakers are speaking on their own behalf. They're not speaking on behalf of their respective organizations, except for Eva.
I was going to say,
who is
Eva.
definitely speaking on behalf of her.
They know where I'm coming from, so they're already like going, we didn't invite her, we don't know what she's going to say. And I have to say that you heard my credentials, but I don't have a ring, and he has two. So what can I say, you know?
Something far more valuable.
There you go. And he didn't bring it because I think he thought somebody would mug him and take it. When I was looking at the question about diversity and the Heritage Foundation, which you can imagine I do not support at all, it was very irritating to me because, and I was thinking about the context for this. One reason I have such a long bio is I'm old. I was born when Plessy versus Ferguson was the law. No, literally, in Texas. No, I'm not making, no, I was. I'm old. Black don't crack, but I'm old. So I was at Northwestern University. I interviewed for a job on the phone. I got the job. I went to take the job. And, oh, the job's been filled. This happens this is liberal Evanston, Illinois. This goes on a lot. So what you have to understand is that diversity, from where I come from, is a very watered down term. What we really are about is desegregating the workforce. What happened was you had the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and this was a result of people pushing and pushing and pushing because the workforces were segregated. And so you had a Civil Rights Act, Title VII, which said that the workforce has to be desegregated. So people sued. As I said, if I had a tattoo on my arm, it would say "Born to Sue." People like me like going out there to sue. And I have to say, and they had nothing to do with what I'm going to say next. But if you're defending racism on behalf of your clients, stop it. Don't do it. You may be brilliant. You may find all kinds of ways to get around it. Don't do it. Because if you're defending it, you are perpetuating the segregation. So you had a series of decisions that said you don't have to take someone to court in order to desegregate the workforce. The Weber case, you're allowed to voluntarily desegregate the workforce. So my view of things is that people like me were stopped from getting jobs in Evanston. People all over the country have been stopped from getting jobs. And what you're trying to do is desegregate the workforce. Diversity is a nice term for it, but it's really about desegregation. Two other quick things I'll say. Yolanda did an incredible job of breaking it all down. We use social science at the Equal Justice Society to talk about how to deal with racism. There are two studies you need to know about. One is, are Lakeisha and Jamal as employable as Emily and Brandon? Once I said that, there was a brother named Brandon in the audience. He said, but the whole notion is there is name bias, and people with black-sounding names are less likely to get called back. I gave the talk one time, and a young woman named Lakeisha came up to me and said, they won't call me back, but when I say I'm L. Jenkins, I get called back. Second one is even more devastating. I'm sure you've heard about this, and this is the last thing I'll say. There was a study done that you've probably heard about. They wrote a memo. They had 25 errors in the memo. Syntax errors, spelling errors, reasoning errors. They told half of the crowd, and it was black, white, Latino, Asian American folks, that a black person had written the memo. They told the other half of the partners that a white person had written the memo. The group that thought a white person had written the memo found fewer errors in the memo. The people who thought a black person had done it found more errors. And then when they were giving kind of the critique, oh, the white person will fit in so well, and the black person, how did he even graduate from law school? He's so terrible. So there's all this bias that we have, and Yolanda's exactly right. We don't know we have it, but we do. The very last thing I'll say, I lied before, was that when my organization started, we said explicit bias is on the way out. We can now deal with implicit bias. White supremacy is alive and well in America. It's terrifying, it's alive and well. So we've got to deal with that, look at that, and not turn away from it. There's a lot more to say, but I'll stop. And they had nothing to do with what I just said.
As a follow-up to that, and I certainly want to get some input from the panel, in August of 2017, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration is preparing to redirect resources from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division and direct that toward investigating and suing universities so that they can eliminate affirmative action in higher education. And so my question, and this is sort of a follow-up to the points that Eva made, is has affirmative action outlived its usefulness? Additionally, is it a good idea for the Justice Department to switch from protecting civil rights to now eliminating higher education opportunities for minorities? And anyone on the panel, you're more than welcome to, David, if you have any thoughts on that.
I just said anyone on the panel. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to who's perceived as belonging and who's perceived as mattering. I think a lot about like the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, our movements have been reduced to arguing that we matter. And if you don't matter, then your presence in the workforce or at a university is superfluous. It doesn't matter. If you don't belong, then discrimination is a natural order of things. And so you're lucky to have been included in the first place because you didn't belong. And so I until we get to the point where it's accepted and understood that we belong, that we matter, that we're American. I mean, I think one of the questions you're going to talk about is with Kaepernick. If we are not part of the body politic, if we are, you know, if the essence of America is Judeo-Christian white male, then everything else is just making space for people, and it's just out of the goodness of the heart, and not that we are a part of the fabric of the country.
And Willie, I know you have some thoughts on this and your role as working at one of the largest tech companies in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's outlived its course. I mean, from my perspective, diversity will be the natural outcome of a game played on a level playing field. And the fact that we don't have the diversity today is the clearest indicator that we're not operating on a level playing field. And you can see it at the early ages of education, the amount of resources that go to the different schools. So it starts very young. You get into the workforce, and then you have things, and we'll get to this one as well. I think the people writing memos at Google that share a very unique view of other people, and so no, I don't think. I mean, if you go back to affirmative action and why it even started, it was to take affirmative steps to deal with the fact that we're not operating on a level playing field. And I think what we see every day in the newspaper shows that we're still not there. The lack of diversity is the clearest indicator that we still need to be taking affirmative steps to level that playing field.
And Eva, go ahead. Eva.
Okay, here's another thing they'll have to disavow. The head of the Department of Justice is Jeff Sessions. He was blocked from being a federal judge because he's too racist. He's also, and you can deal with some of this, he's very anti-immigrant. He and that guy Stephen Miller, I think, would like to run all Latinos out of the country. These people are at least my enemy. So he's leading all this. Second point, I was admitted to UC Berkeley under affirmative action. I passed the bar the first time. Governor Wilson, who opposed affirmative action, it took him 5 times. Nothing against having to take the bar several times, but I clearly was qualified. There were 30 black students in my class. There were 30 black students in my class in '72. When affirmative action was eliminated, 0 black students. When they eliminated affirmative action at the undergraduate school at UC Berkeley, many of us have UC Berkeley ties, there were 800 Latino and African American students with 4.0 averages. They did not get in because they didn't go to schools that had AP classes where you could get more than a 4-point average. So we have to remember what this is all about. People are qualified to who get in through race-conscious affirmative action. The last thing I'll say is that the Trump administration is trying to drive a wedge between Latinos and African Americans and Asian Americans. They're trying to make it seem like we're trying to push Asian Americans out of the way, and I think this is why they're focusing on trying to eliminate race consciousness at places of higher education.
And Ira, I know that you have some thoughts on this in your capacity as having been a general counsel at one of the leading tech gaming companies.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'd like to say I applaud the folks from the Heritage Foundation for using the word discriminatory when talking about race consciousness, because owning the discourse and putting it in such a negative light really does make it seem like a very negative, inherently negative thing. And race consciousness is not negative. For people to say the world is colorblind would not only be an act of ignorance, but would really not be paying attention to the way the world works. Willie just mentioned the concept if it was a level playing field. And as we know, it's not. Privilege is also something that people don't really recognize. And the fact that many people start off from positions of privilege is something that they don't even recognize. And so having a consciousness to be able to see from the other side, whether it's empathy or whether it's simply something more concrete to understand, as he was saying, you know, lack of educational opportunities and all these other elements that relate to someone's success, it's very, very necessary. So I will say that as a general counsel of a technology company, technology companies are not known to be the most diverse companies. In fact, that's why there's a lot of lawsuits right now, a lot of consciousness about the hiring practices of technology companies, very male-dominated. I will say it's also very, in terms of race, very Asian American dominated when it comes to which minorities get hired on. Of course, it comes down to ideas. Asian Americans are the model minority, we don't speak up, we don't cause a fuss, we'll work very hard. In fact, I was told during an interview one time, it's very hip to be an Asian woman right now, isn't it? And I honestly wasn't sure what to say about that. It's a different type of discrimination altogether. I mean, people come up to me and say, hey, I know Kung Fu. I'm really not sure what to do with that. But I will say that being told that it's hip to be an Asian American woman is a funny thing to hear during an interview process. It makes me question, well, are you interviewing me for my skill set? And back to the point that race itself, there's biases against races based on their skill set. There may be biases towards certain races for certain skill sets, but any sort of racial bias in that light is inherently negative. Race consciousness when it comes to diversity issues is necessary. And I think as leaders of the legal community, which so many of us are in this room, whether in-house or at a firm, mentoring and giving people an example to look at. Because I think a lot of what happens is this implicit bias that Eva's talking about. You do favor those to mentor that look like you, that may remind you of who you were at a certain age. And because the way the world works, especially in America, leadership positions are historically not held by those of color, by women, by LGBT. There's a lot of different faces that we need in leadership. So for all of us to work hard and get to leadership positions, it's necessary to be race conscious and understand it will never be a colorblind world, nor do I want it to be. Diversity is what makes this world amazing. Diversity is what brings different opinions to the table. So discriminatory is a very wonderful and inflammatory word to use against anything related to race. And I think that owning the discourse and making it clear that it's race consciousness, especially when in a company, especially where you can make an influence. Money talks, leadership positions talk, positions as a hiring manager, those are important roles for us to fill.
And Yolanda, I know in your position as the executive director of the Bar Association and also a general counsel, you have a unique perspective and a unique platform to look at these issues.
Well, one of the things that we do that a lot of firms probably don't have the time to do is we look at the data and we keep on top of the trends because that tells the story. If all we do is talk about this anecdotally, we're talking to deaf ears. People aren't going to listen. And if you happen to be a person of color or someone who's diverse talking about these issues, then you're just complaining because it's you. So that's one of the things that we do is we publish the data. We do our goals and timetable study every year that focuses on what is really happening in the practice and what are the experiences of the 3 minorities that happen to be in a 100-person law firm office, you know, because it goes beyond just getting your foot in the door. You to David's point, at some point you still continue to not matter. If you're the only Latina working in a law firm and all of the partners keep mistaking you for the other Latina that used to work there, or the receptionist, you show up for your interview, and these are real stories because again, we study these and we've done surveys of people. The receptionist thinks you're the burrito lady coming in to sell lunch to the staff, right? So they're called microaggressions, but it goes beyond just getting hired, and really kind of speaks to whether you get promoted, whether or not you get good cases, whether or not you get enough work to make your billable hours, and we know it's all about the business model at the end of the day.
And if I can just make a quick point before Lisa goes to the next question. I had a very funny experience a couple of weeks ago where I met a client for the first time in person. We had corresponded by email and by telephone, and apparently the client had never actually looked me up on the firm website. And so, and so we met in the LA office. I was going to be preparing him for his deposition, and he said, "Oh my God, you're Terrence Evans?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're Terrence Evans?" I said, he said, "I thought you were an old white guy." He said, "I can't believe that you're black." And it just came out naturally, and I wasn't offended, but I thought it was pretty interesting. In 2017, I can't believe you're black. So it was interesting that was from a client.
All right, well, now we're going to pivot a little bit, and we're actually going to go back to that Google memo. So August 2017, yet again, we had that engineer, James Damore, and he made headlines with his lovely memo, excuse my editorial pause there, about the biological differences between men and women. And he said that it's really the efforts to remedy that gap are drowning out ideological diversity and creating a culture that discriminates against conservative viewpoints. The initial reaction by the company was quite temperate, and it took them a few days of bad press before they finally said, "Oh, no, that memo violates our code of conduct and crosses the line by advancing harmful gender stereotypes in our workplace." So the question is, should companies in Google's position terminate those employees who make controversial statements? Should they use it as a teachable moment? And should they do a little bit of both? Does it actually start a conversation about diversity and inclusion? Lily, do you want to start?
Sure. I think they should do both. I supported Google's move to terminate the employee. I mean, the First Amendment protects speech up to a point, and that point is when the speech becomes harmful to the community in one way or another. And I look at this the same way. I mean, ideological diversity exists in every single company and always has. So that, to me, is just a fallacy. Companies are filled with people who vote Republican, Democrat, Independent, Socialist, Green Party. There are views all over the spectrum. And so this isn't about just a controversial statement. His statement harmed the environment. It made it not possible for Google to work as a team and be productive. And so just from a straight business perspective, when those views become toxic to the environment, become harmful to your ability to achieve business objectives, it's not just a controversial view. It's harmful to the community. So I supported Google in making that decision for that reason, and I think they should use it as a teaching opportunity. And I think they should explain that part of it. It's not just about taking them out for a controversial view, because I don't think Google wants to quell the different views of their workforce, but they can't become harmful to the community.
Yolanda?
So when I looked at this question, I thought about the many value statements that corporations have, and that is what this was akin to me. We could have the First Amendment. Is there a right to fire somebody over them exercising their First Amendment rights? But to me, this is, if this same employee had said, we don't think a dime of our money should ever go back to the community, who cares about giving back to the community to help the community, what is sustainability, I don't support that, they would have been fired, because that describes the value of most of our corporations today. And this is something that Google found was important, and then you have an employee that allows a memo to go out that then goes viral in public, that it goes against his value statement. So I supported the firing for the same reasons, and yes, it will turn into a First Amendment debate, but I think it's bigger than that. This also ties in with the recent Apple statement about their new African-American female diversity director saying that 12 white men in a room is diverse because they all have different backgrounds and they think differently. It's been a firestorm on the internet. She's getting a lot of backlash for it. She's tried to apologize in writing behind it, but it doesn't help move this ball forward in terms of a conversation. We keep making excuses for why we can be more gentle about discrimination, right, when that's really what it is. And we know that if you get 3 Latinos, 3 Asians, 3 blacks in a room, you're gonna get a very different decision than if you have 12 white people, or 9 white people in a room. And we shouldn't be afraid to say that. We should not be afraid to say that. We all have different backgrounds, poor, rich, black, white, rural, you know, and that's what the beauty of to David's point, the fabric is. And I was a little disappointed that somebody kind of went public to kind of preserve people's feelings, to say 12 white men in a room is diverse, because it isn't. 12 black people in a room is not diverse.
There's another piece of this that's alarming, and we have to really pay attention to what's going on around us. And that is talking about biological differences between men and women. I saw one of these white supremacist people saying that he didn't think women should be allowed to vote. And we kind of laugh at this, but we remember Charlottesville and people marching with tiki torches, and a young white woman is dead. So there are some very dangerous forces out in society. I don't know if you follow this, Lisa, but Jeff Sessions, who you can tell I really do not like, was a fan of an early immigration philosophy that was all about eugenics, and that people from certain parts of the world really weren't the kind of people who should fit into society here. And you hear some of that echoed in Trump's ideology. And so I think we're here in San Francisco. I'm in a band and I was singing in Grand Rapids over the weekend, and people don't look like us. And a lot of them voted for Trump. And there are people out there for whom the eugenics argument is not necessarily just what? So we have to be really aware of what's been unleashed out there in the world. Maybe not here, but it's out there. And those people elected a president. And so we don't want to be all paranoid and scared, but somebody talking about biological differences between men and women, and then women shouldn't vote, and then Latinos should be sent out of the country because they're rapists. So it's a dangerous time, and we shouldn't be too comfortable here.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything? You're
What concerns me also is that I think the message actually, and the funny thing is I think a lot of people commenting about the memo probably didn't bother reading the entire 10-page memo. But what concerns me a little bit is that those that did will probably read things in that memo that really resonate. Beyond the biological component, which I completely agree with Eva, there's many people that actually listen to that and say, oh my gosh, he's totally right. But there's also a lot of discussion he said about the oppression of the conservative view, the fact that they're silenced and they're not allowed to speak. He pointed out as well, and this is interesting, he said that many of the programs that Google has put in place are limited in participation by race or gender, essentially implying that for white men there's no ability to get mentorship or guidance. And some of these themes resonate strongly with people. And I'm not a white man. I don't really understand from the idea of being privileged to begin with. I can recognize the fact that it's hard to identify that you are privileged. At the same time, I myself listened to that statement where he said, there's nothing for me to participate in, essentially. And it kind of rang a bell a little bit to say, wow, maybe that's true. Maybe he's being excluded. So if I can think that, I'm reading this memo, and I got to say personally, half of it made me angry and half of it made me laugh. But at the same time, he points out these items of note that really do resonate with people. So again, the danger of having folks espouse these rather frightening views about differences that make one particular person much less qualified than another to do a job. Embedded in there are kernels of what he says are truths that I think people will embrace. Again, try not to get too political or start an anti-Trump rally here. It concerns me that a lot of the sentiments espoused by the current administration are grasped, and the white supremacist movement has spawned a new life because of the fact that some of these opinions are now they've become truth. They become, to some people, very defensible positions because the administration doesn't seem to take a hard stance against them. And so now more than ever, I think the vigilance over this type of thinking is important. At the same time, I don't think that it's good to quell discussion, but I think open discourse is a good thing. But someone penning a 10-page memo under the auspices of being an employee within a company and spreading it out to the world can be alarming in a lot of ways.
So this takes us to our next question, and it's among the most controversial topics in the country right now, and this is the national anthem protests. The national anthem protests initiated by Colin Kaepernick during his tenure as the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers has been among the most controversial acts of free speech in sports history. It was just today that our president tweeted a new update regarding his feelings on the issue. Colin was specifically protesting police brutality against people of color, which has somehow been misinterpreted as disrespecting the U.S. military and the flag. President Trump has specifically called on NFL owners to fire players who refuse to stand for the national anthem. So my question to our panel, and I'll start with David, should professional athletes be allowed to exercise their First Amendment right by taking a knee during the national anthem, or should they be forced to stand with their hand held over their heart?
Before you start, are you guys going to the White House?
No.
Okay.
So
Just kidding.
it's interesting. I mean, so last year when Colin Kaepernick started protesting during the off season for us, and so we bring you into the inner sanctum a little bit. We had conversations about what are our guys going to do when the season starts, and it was, I mean, it's good that we have a diverse executive team because we have conversations about issues, and it was the guys are going to do what the guys want to do. Is ultimately what's going to happen, and so now the real question should be, what are we going to do when the guys do what they want to do? Are we going to support them or are we not going to support them? And so what we have to do as the Warriors is support the players. And so we wanted to send a signal to the guys that we're not telling you to kneel. We're not telling you to stand. We want you to know that we support what it is that you want to do and that you have a voice and you have a platform. And so we had conversations about, well, should we have an event? Should we have like a town hall meeting to maybe bring some light to the subject? And we decided what we did is, instead of doing something public where we're trying to get marketing and publicity and PR from it, we actually had a private event. After practice one day, we brought in Dr. Harry Edwards, and we brought in Dr. Marshall from Alive and Free, to just have a conversation with the guys about the history of protests. And what the goal of that was to make sure that the guys were better informed, that they knew they had resources, and they knew that the organization supported them. And quite honestly, the controversy of if the guys were to take a knee or not take a knee, that's not good for the Warriors, right? But you don't necessarily even get there when the guys know that they're supported. and the guys know that if they did what they wanted to do, that the organization would back them up. So if you get to the genesis of why Colin is doing what he's doing, it's because no one is addressing the issues that need to be addressed. And so if you let the players know that you support the issues and you support them, then you get to a result where you don't even have the controversy.
Eva, did you have any thoughts on this particular?
Of course she doesn't.
So Eva, before you start, can I just throw out
Please.
a bombshell question?
Oh, go.
How many people think that the way that the players are treating, the way that the owners are treating the players in the NFL feels like modern day slavery?
One owner in particular.
Well, yeah. I mean, where they really say, we will take your livelihood away if you don't do what we say. This is our team. And, okay.
So for me, the first, so I started at the Warriors in 2012. So 2013 in the playoffs is when the Donald Sterling thing happened. And so I was 1 year into the job at that point in time. And so we're playing the Clippers, and you have in the playoffs, and the Magic, the comments that Donald Sterling said about Magic Johnson happened on a Saturday. We had a game on a Sunday. And I remember sitting in that arena like, I shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be playing this game. I don't know if I'm going to, dream job, no dream job. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep this job. Like, the NBA needs to actually come out and make a strong statement on this. And luckily for me, the NBA did on that Tuesday. And luckily for the NBA did on that Tuesday as well. But I think that's, if you look at the fact, the NBA is 90% African American male, right?
NFL is like 75,
Right.
80% African American.
But you haven't seen the protests in the NBA, and you have seen them in the NFL. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the NBA players feel that they have a voice, and they feel supported, and they feel like they can say what they want to say either on Twitter. They could protest or not protest. They feel that, they know that, they are empowered. They exerted their power privately in order to get the NBA to do what they wanted the NBA to do with respect to an owner. And there's no greater power than that necessarily. And so I think that's, you see the difference between the NBA and the NFL and the way the athletes have reacted. It's the NBA players, I think, know that they are empowered. There's a quote that a riot is the voice of the unheard. And when you're heard, you have other avenues, and you go through other avenues.
Here's the deal. Trump is trying to divert us. Think about the pitiful response to Puerto Rico, the Russia probe going on, all the insanity that goes on, not just every day, but it seems like every hour. So, and once again, I'm just speaking for myself. The other people don't agree with this necessarily. But he's throwing out red meat to his base, and he's distracting people from all the insanity that's going on in the world. This wasn't an issue till he made it an issue, and he keeps bringing it up, bringing it up, bringing it up. And so we have to remember he's trying to distract us from other more important issues. As Goodell said yesterday, there are only, he said, 6 players actually taking the knee. The last thing I'll say is there's a gentleman in the back of the room. We were together on the USS Hornet yesterday talking with some Vietnam vets after the Ken Burns series on Vietnam. And they were very upset. They thought that veterans were being disrespected. And we tried to make the point that it was not about being anti-American or anti-veteran or anti-national anthem, but it was about bringing attention to the fact that Black and brown men are shot and very few people are ever brought to justice for it, and he's bringing attention to that. So, but don't be distracted by Trump.
And I was just going to make an additional point before we get to the next question, which will specifically deal with the Warriors. I think a lot of folks in their everyday lives, they don't really understand the whole concept of police brutality and what Black men have to go through on a regular basis. I know I've had conversations with Joe West, and we've commiserated and talked about our respective experiences dealing with the police. I personally have had the police pull guns on me because they thought I was a threat. It happened when I was in law school studying for a law school exam, and they said that I fit the description of someone who had robbed a store, and the next thing I know, I have more than 4 guns, pointed at my head, and I'm very conscious that I have to be very careful not to move because I'll be a dead man. I've been pulled over several times driving my car and stopped by the police who asked me, how did you get that car? What are you doing in this car? So it's something that we deal with on a regular basis, and that's why it's such a very powerful topic in the African American community in particular. But that leads us to our next point, which also has been a very big news story. We had the issue of Stephen Curry talking about whether or not he would accept an invitation to go to the White House, and he indicated that he would not. And then we had Donald Trump responding by a tweet, of course, withdrawing the invitation to the entire team. And I thought that the response from the Golden State Warriors was just so classic, and it was just so well done. And if I may, it's a short statement. I'm just going to read it. This was their press release, which I thought was short, sweet, and to the point. While we intended to meet as a team at the first opportunity we had this morning collaboratively to discuss a potential visit to the White House, we accept that President Trump has made it clear that we are not invited. We believe there is nothing more American than our citizens having the right to express themselves freely on matters important to them. We're disappointed that we did not have an opportunity during this process to share our views or to have open dialogue on issues impacting our communities that we felt would be important to raise. And then this is the part that really got me. In lieu of a visit to the White House, we've decided that we'll constructively use our trip to the nation's capital in February to celebrate equality, diversity, inclusion, the values we embrace as an organization. Now, David, I don't know if you wrote that statement, but that was so well put together, and I thought it just painted the organization in a positive light. And maybe you can share with us, what some of the thinking was going on with the Warriors around this particular issue.
So we saw the issue coming when we won the championship. And we knew that, it was going to be something that a lot of people were going to say that we should go. We also knew that a lot of the players did not want to go or were not going to go. And again, the question a lot of times is, they are not slaves. So it's not what are you going to get the players to do, is what are the players going to do, and then how are you going to respond? And so we wanted to have a conversation amongst the players, and so all the guys had not been together inside of one place. The text messages going around, and certain players like Steph and KD, and I think Andre had made statements that they were not going to go to the White House. So we were pretty confident what the mood of the room was going to be. But one thing that Joe prides himself on, Joe Lacob, owner of the Warriors, prides himself on with respect to the way he runs the organization is this process. Everyone's voice is heard, and then when a decision is made, it's the organization's decision. And so he wanted to be able to meet with the players. He wanted Coach Kerr to be able to meet with the players, and he wanted all the players to be together inside of the same room and come up with a decision. And so when that chance for them to meet was taken away by what President Trump did, in some ways it was, all right, that's fine. In another way, it gave us a platform to actually talk about what it is that we do value. And we just come out with a value statement this time last year internally as an organization. And so we use that as an opportunity to basically take that value statement of ours and use the platform and the megaphone that he had given us to blast out.
Any other thoughts, Eva?
Remember that there's a game we played as a kid called Connect the Dots. We got to connect the dots. Trump started his candidacy with the birther movement, trying to undermine Obama, making him seem like he wasn't really an American, point one. Point two, and I was talking to the gentleman in the back today about this, many people felt threatened by the fact that there was a black man in the White House and a black family in the White House, and that has produced a lot of reaction that helped Trump. Think about how he has picked on black folks to focus on, the NFL, the NBA. He's whipping up his base. So keep in mind that that's a subtext of what's going on. It's not a coincidence that he's picking on black football players, black basketball players. So we have to keep in mind the toxic environment that this is taking place in. And I'm so proud of the Dubs. I think they're just great, and I'm glad you all did what you did.
So this leads us to our next topic, and I'm so happy to be here with Lisa, who is one of, and she's very humble about it, but she's really one of the leading immigration lawyers in San Francisco. She has fought tirelessly for folks who have tried to qualify through the DACA program to protect the Dreamers, and she's helped so many refugees and people trying to make a better life in this country. So I want to give Lisa an opportunity to talk about her work in these major issues.
All right, thank you. Eva and I are actually, I think, very much of the same mindset. It's what's very upsetting, just so all of you know, DACA is the Deferred Action for Early Childhood Arrivals. So these are the people who were brought to the United States when they were very young. Some of them do not know the country they come from. They don't know the language of the country they come from. And as much as Dick Durbin really tried to get us a DREAM Act passed, it just never got passed by Congress. So what happened is President Obama gave us an executive order and said, okay, if you were here as of a certain date and you're under a certain age and you've gone to school, then we're going to give you this work authorization and this status to be allowed to stay in the U.S. So what happens is Jeff Sessions, who has always been anti-immigrant, I mean, this is not a new position he's espousing. He hates the DACA program. He actually doesn't really like immigrants at all, but he's in charge, which is kind of frightening. His answer was that the end of the DACA program was necessary, and what he said is because the underlying program was illegal. He also said that those who came to the country illegally, even through no fault of their own, right? We're talking about babies who were brought here, should not get everything that would flow to people who wait their turn and enter lawfully. Well, that's so not our U.S. immigration system. That's, yes, listen, I earn my living getting visas for people to enter the U.S. through family, through employment, but we've always allowed refugees. The DREAM Act students, it was already decided these are people who have really contributed. I work a lot with folks from United We Dream, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Some of these people are valedictorians at their colleges. I mean, this is not a group of people who are just sitting there saying, give me a handout. These are people who have really worked hard and helped the U.S. society, and quite frankly, helped the diversity of our country. So now we've got the problem of Trump announced the end of DACA. So they announced the end of DACA, and they said, oh, but you have literally, you've got about a month. Anyone whose DACA ends before March 5th, so you can file 6 months in advance, so by October 5th, they gave us a month to do all the extensions for anybody who is expiring during that 6-month period. And we're lucky, we have a very supportive law firm. We've got a great pro bono project here, and we file tons of DACA renewals for people. So our people will have work authorization for the next 2 years. But here's the problem. We've got all these people who have DACA who expire in April. They couldn't get their renewals. And so through the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, through our efforts with the state of California, we're looking for solutions. And I've actually, and Maxine Bailey, raise your hand, Maxine, who works with me here, another immigration attorney, we've been speaking to groups about finding alternatives and what other solutions legally in the immigration system can be done to help these young folks. So the fight is not over, and we're working on it, but it's again tearing at the fabric, as far as I'm concerned, of the diversity and inclusion in our country. Eva, did you want to add something about that?
Here, with you.
Okay.
And did you want to say something briefly on the travel ban?
Yeah, so just one other thing, just so you know, because again, we're in California, we're very lucky. So a lot of these young DACA folks have driver's licenses, And so for employment purposes, right, you need to do your I-9, the employment verification, they have a work authorization card. But when their driver's licenses expire now, they can go back and California has what's called AB 60, so it's a program to allow anyone to get a driver's license so you can get insurance. Because we think about, in California, our community. And that's really, I think, where the discussion has to be looked at for the United States as a whole. How do we protect our community? Well, people being insured drivers, guess what? That protects everybody. So just one more thing that we're looking at are how to continue driver's licenses, how to continue people's ability to stay.
Can I jump in on that? 'Cause
Yes,
I think
please.
that's a really good point. I mean, we talk about, obviously, there needs to be a legal answer to this
Right.
ultimately, but we talk in the business community about what we can do. This is one of those cases where we are unified in the business community. We had an all-hands with Meg Whitman, our CEO, not too long ago, and during the Q&A, a gentleman stood up and said, "I'm a DACA recipient, and I don't know that I'm going to be here." And it really resonated with everybody that these are, one, people's lives, but also these are our colleagues, and it would have a real business impact on us if these people are plucked out of our community. And this is one where I think, you know, a lot of you may be at large companies, we have a voice and we're unified on this issue. And I feel like this is the time for the business community to really use that voice and put a little wind in the sail so that there
Yes.
can be a legal resolution to this, particularly given all of the politics today. But the business community is strong, and this is one of those issues where we can actually say we're unified.
Thank you. The other thing I just want to point out, I think the statistic was there are tens of thousands of public school teachers who are DACA recipients. So we're also affecting our children, right? Everybody's children, because there aren't going to be enough teachers. My husband's a public school teacher. I don't know how he could teach any more kids if he tried. Maxine's husband's a public school teacher. So, and an immigrant. But it's, you know, people forget there's the ripple effect, and it affects so many different aspects of our society. So, but thank you, Lily. It's really good to know the companies are behind helping the DACA folks.
Lisa, the other thing I would bring up are the numbers of all these different efforts. So you talked about the travel ban, you talked about DACA. I mentioned earlier the temporary protective status, which protects certain groups from Haiti, Honduras, and I forget the third area that currently, Salvador. And Haiti's expires coming up in March.
Sudan's is
but,
about to expire too, yeah.
That's protection that's giving to immigrants who leave their country because of the dangers, frankly. And I don't want to say refugees, but there's another term for it. And they're slated to let them all expire, which means I think the total number I counted between the three groups was 700,000 to 800,000 will be shipped out overnight if the status expires. That on top of DACA, which is about 1 million or something, it's insane.
Yeah. So TPS, just so for those of you who don't know, is called temporary protected status, and it literally does say you have the umbrella, the ability to stay here. It's and some of these people have been in the United States for decades, you know, and they really don't have countries to go home to, and they're going to go home to countries where they're going to be killed, where they're not going to be able to survive. I mean, it's a horrendous humanitarian crisis that's been created, and they're part of our workforce. Yeah. So the other thing, just the last thing about the travel ban, just so you all know, is 2 days ago, October 17th, so we have, you know, travel ban 3.0 going on right now, and they added in North Korea and Venezuela, because now it's no longer a Muslim ban, even though they called it a Muslim ban themselves, so it's not, I'm not just trying to say this facetiously. And we already had district court judges in both Maryland and Hawaii. There's a temporary restraining order, there's a preliminary injunction. It's stopped again, so people can freely come. But what's interesting, and I just want to point out, our country, unfortunately, we've done this before, and we did this with the Japanese internment camps. And there's a fabulous movie that I'm happy to, anybody who wants to know about, it's going to be shown again in December, talking about specifically the Japanese internment camps and how it's exactly the same arguments a about national security with no data behind it.
That's right.
And that's what's going on again. It's, this ban, they're saying is for national security reasons, and there is nothing behind it.
So this brings us to one of the most controversial news stories of the year, and I'm sure everybody in this room who owns a television or has seen a newspaper or has access to the internet has heard about Charlottesville. So in August of 2017, President Trump faced backlash from Republicans and Democrats when he commented on racial violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, stating, "I think there's blame on both sides in Charlottesville." And then he went on to say that you're changing history, you're changing culture by taking down these Confederate statues. So he had this controversial statement. He walked it back when his handlers told him, hey, that's not a good idea. And then he came out forcefully and said the same thing again. So my question to the panel, was President Trump correct when he said that there's...
Show of hands, no.
Was President Trump correct when he said that there's blame on both sides when he commented on Charlottesville? Please explain your position, and I'm sure every person at this table has an opinion. And Yolanda, you were jumping right in there, so why don't you...
I just say no.
No.
It's pretty simple for me. We can start with other people who haven't talked as much.
Ira, do you want to comment?
No.
He's not correct.
I actually really like how Eva's describing so much of what Trump is doing as a deflection and trying to, make sure that his base is still satisfied. And clearly this is a funny one because he had to please his base. He could not openly condemn and immediately condemn the actions because I think a lot of his base are the folks that end up siding in the tiki torch side of the argument. It's problematic in so many ways, I think, to have an administration that seems to espouse these very racist views, and at least doesn't condemn them, which in itself is sort of a supportive argument. I think one of the concerns I have sometimes is if I was not here in the United States, how in God's name would I be looking at this country? Because of course the leadership of this country has these views that are just very frighteningly un-American, and what would I do as a leader of another country, as an individual in another country, as a potential talented employee from another country that might be considering moving to, for example, the Silicon Valley, being part of the innovation that's making the whole world a more interesting, more vibrant place. Would I really want to come to a country that seems to be represented by these ideas? I think the harm can be widespread, and I think it's up to all of us to ensure that everyone in this world, frankly, and as well within the country who's feeling very isolated, who may be living in some of these areas where the tiki torches are burning brightly, it's necessary for everyone to know that this does not represent the United States. There's some things where you might be able to see both sides on positions where white supremacists are not openly condemned and immediately criticized. I think that it's necessary for all of us to make sure that American voices are heard and that it's not just from the top that somehow describes how all of us feel. So, no, short answer.
And Willie, do you have some thoughts on that topic?
I think that said it all. Of course, no. We're all equal. And when you have one side standing up saying we're all equal, and one side standing up and saying we're not, they're not equivalent. To me, it's pretty simple.
And David, any thoughts on the both sides comment? Trying to...
Hell no. I think something that Yolanda was talked about with respect to the slides. A white male acting aggressively with a tiki torch is the equivalent of a black male. Period. The threat, the perceived threat is the same. And I think that's what that comment actually speaks to, is that our very presence and the presence of those who would support us is as much of a threat as you've all seen the picture of the person screaming. Those two are equivalent in his mind. And I think that's what that really speaks to.
And Eva, I know you definitely have some thoughts on this topic.
A lot of the Confederate statues were put up during the 1960s to kind of put civil rights people in their place, so they weren't put up right after the Civil War. Then you have people saying that the Civil War was not fought about slavery. There's a T-shirt I've seen that says, "I'm tired, I've been black all day." And this is what it feels like. There's just so much nonsense going on. And once again, he's playing to his base. And one of the things I think that made a lot of people crazy was a black president. There's social science research done that says this makes unevolved white people feel that the social order is being messed up in a way that doesn't favor them anymore. But if you tell them having a black president doesn't change the social order, they're calm. So I think people like us make people crazy, and you've got Trump fanning the flames, and that's his base. I mean, remember during the campaign, that black woman in Kentucky, I'll never forget it. Remember she was in a green dress, and they were just pushing her out of she's suing, but they're just pushing her, and I just felt this is like slavery again. It's like they think we are just bodies to be dealt with in any way they want. It is very tiring, but I'm glad we're able to be here talking about this, and you guys are all really powerful people who can do stuff and are, so are you. So I am tired, though. It's tiring, very tiring.
Well, this takes us to our final question before we open it up to the audience and then get closing thoughts from the panel. And this is LGBT rights. So we really tried to cover all of our bases here with the questioning. And so during the Donald Trump, campaign, he walked around at one point with the LGBT rainbow flag, and he was actively trying to get folks in the LGBT community to vote for him. And there was one point during his campaign, I remember when he was speaking at the Republican National Convention, and he was reading about his support, and he pledged that he was going to retain the LGBT protections implemented by former President Barack Obama. However, I just want to point out three major things that Donald Trump has done, and there have been so many, but I could only do three because we have limited time here. So in March of 2017, President Trump rescinded an Obama executive order banning federal contractors from discriminating against employees on the basis of sexual orientation and identity. So Obama had an executive order. It protected federal employees, but he also had a second executive order that protected employees of contractors. So if you do business with the federal government, you can't discriminate. Got rid of that. Wasn't satisfied there. In July of 2017, the month after Gay Pride Month, the Trump administration announced a ban on transgender people serving in the U.S. military. And all of this is so ironic, at least for us here, because last year we had one of the leading transgender lawyers in the United States. And the year before that, we had the first openly transgender judge elected in the United States of America sitting right here speaking to you. So he decides that he wants to kick all of them out of the U.S. military. And then finally, just last month, September 2017, the Justice Department intervened in a private employment lawsuit pending in the 2nd District and argued. So they went out of their way, right? They weren't parties. They said, we're going to intervene because we have a point to make. We have something to say. They intervened in this private suit, and they argued that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Eva was just talking about it, does not protect LGBT Americans from being fired because of their sexual orientation. So in plain English, the Trump administration intentionally intervened into a private lawsuit that had nothing to do with them to make the point that gay people, lesbian people, transgender people, bisexual people should be fired because of their sexual orientation, that the employer should have the right to do that. And so my question is, how should the community respond? How should private employers respond to what appears to be a rolling back of civil rights? And it can be broad. You can focus on the LGBT community or any community. But what should our response be? Should we just sit passively and let all this happen? Or should we take some affirmative response? And David, I'll start with you.
I think it's an understanding, well, we're not going back. but it's an understanding of who the we is and make sure that the we is broad. And also understand that we all have our own implicit bias and allow for growth, for people to grow, but demand that people grow at the same time. And so that's, I guess, the easiest way for me to, or the most succinct way for me to say how I feel about it. But it's unacceptable for one group as an African American man to say, as long as you're keeping your hands off my rights, you can take someone else's rights. And that's so the we has to be broad, and we cannot go back.
I would just add to that, there was synergy around groups coming together, around things that were happening to other groups that weren't them. And I have to say, as an African-American person, I think we felt a little safe over the last 8 years, like, okay, maybe the civil rights thing did work, and maybe we are all equal. We can focus on helping the LGBT community and the Latino community. And he's dividing all that again, because there's so much going on. We don't have time to sit back and say, we're cool, let's go help. You know, we can't, because we're now focused on fighting our own battles in some ways, which, but you said it very succinctly, that the we needs to be broader, but he's strategically pitting us against each other on purpose.
And Willie, do you have any thoughts? I know from your position in the tech world and at one of the largest computer companies in the world, your thoughts on this issue?
I mean, I think David's point's a good one. We don't have to go back. You know, just because something's happening out there, there's no reason our company has to take a different position. One of the first companies to offer health benefits to the LGBT community and their partners was IBM, and they did it in the 1950s.
Wow.
Nobody was even talking about it. They just felt it was the right thing to do. And so, you know, they led by example, and I mean, to me, that's what we should all be doing as well. We can continue to live our individual lives the right way, and as corporate citizens, we can continue to conduct our business and treat our own communities in the right way, and I think we lead by example.
And Ira, did you have any thoughts on this? I know you have a unique perspective. You've been general counsel at one of the leading gaming companies and dealing with all kinds of diversity issues.
I am just going to mirror Willie's thoughts on this. I completely agree that as private people who work in a public sphere, we have the ability to influence. Again, going back to this point, we are not the administration. I feel like this is sort of a dark period in a certain way. A lot of us can sort of go into the hole, try to hide for the next several years and hope that it all passes, and that's not the right thing to do, even though it'd be more comfortable just to try to ignore the news. I think it's necessary for us to stay informed, and every time the administration does something we disagree with, as private citizens who have influence in our own spheres and even outside of those spheres, I think it's necessary to take action. And absolutely, like any company that I'm a part of, I will refuse to allow the sort of discriminatory practices that perhaps are espoused by the administration. Simply doesn't matter. You know, certainly I'm not going to be asking for the Justice Department support and fire folks based on any class that they happen to be. We just all have to remain vigilant, and there are things that we can do in our own communities.
And Eva, I know you've been on the forefront of so many battles for the LGBT community, women, people of color, immigrants. Just your thoughts on what appears to be this rolling back of civil rights.
You mentioned that I was one of the founders of the California Civil Rights Coalition. We're trying to reconstitute that to have a coalitional approach to things so we can have each other's back. So stay tuned, because we have to, if together we're strong, and California is like holding the line. So, you know, we can do good stuff here.
So before we get final thoughts, we wanted to open it up to the audience. I mean, you've got some of the greatest minds right here. If you had any questions.
Especially for the two people on my right.
And can you stand up and speak up? We want to make sure it gets on the video.
Especially for the two people on my right. As a lawyer, I always remember the old thing, the best antidote for negative speech is more free speech. And I was just wondering how you see the tension between the Kaepernick case and the Google person. I mean, why should the Google person be fired and Kaepernick not be excluded from the NFL? What's the difference why aren't they both issues of free speech that deserve the same?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and I take a very corporate view on it. What the Google employee did was speech that was harmful to the business mission, and it made it very difficult for them to work as teams, work in a collaborative environment, and achieve their business objectives. The 49ers are a football team, and their job is to step onto the field and play football. And there's nothing about his statement that prevents them from working as a team to meet their business objectives. So to me, that's the difference. If his speech was calling out specific individuals on that team that created a different culture in the locker room that could transfer out to the field, then you're looking at it from a business perspective and saying this is harming our ability to meet our business objectives, and that's a different message. But there's nothing about what Colin Kaepernick is doing that is disrupting the 49ers business objectives.
Well stated. That gentleman over here to the
I
left.
disagree. I don't think that's well stated at all. I'm concerned with your concern about the corporate point of view because the Koch brothers don't have that point of view. And if somebody at the Koch brothers said things that were consistent with the Koch brothers' point of view, that would be contrary to our cultural point of view and our cultural values. And I think that's what is the touchstone. It is not a particular corporate point of view. It is a cultural point of view which we as a people have. We have a constitution, we have an independent, we have a Bill of Rights, and those are the issues and those are the values that we need to enhance. And when what Colin Kaepernick was doing is consistent with that, and what this other fellow did was not. And I think to the extent that we don't speak to that, there's concern. There's one other point, if I can change. There's an issue that I think I want to bring to it as a white man. I had the unfortunate experience once upon a time of being improperly drawn on by cops. And I don't think that the black community understands the divide, the lack of comprehension that white people have about how fundamentally scary that is, that black people experience all the time. And I just think that there's a necessity to speak to that. There's an educational gulf based on the experience, based on race, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, that exists. And I think that it's not being adequately addressed.
Any response from anyone on the panel?
I mean, well, I'm not sure I disagree with you. I mean, I do think there's a cultural aspect to it, and I think it's a little easier for companies to look at speech that is consistent with our values as people, and our corporate values, which are largely codified to be consistent with what, how we live our individual lives. So I don't know that I disagree with that. I think it is a factor. I think just again, maybe taking too corporate of a view, we have to somehow distinguish controversial views. We can have employees that have different views on gun rights, and I don't think if there's a debate over lunch among employees where an employee says, I think we should ban all guns, and the other, obviously the opposite view, the Second Amendment's paramount, that's probably not leading to the Google termination. And so, I mean, somehow we have to deal with the controversial part of it and allow people to have controversial views, but there has to be some line. And when it becomes disruptive, whether it's because it's inconsistent with the values and it creates a bad culture, or it just actually has an impact on our ability to achieve a business result, that's the line.
And back to the gentleman's point originally, which one way I read that to be is, when should a company start censoring speech amongst its employees, which I think is a very good point. If you as a management team feel one way about a certain position or maybe a different opinion, you don't want to be seen as very subjective in selecting who you fire and who you don't. I think this, and kind of going back to being very corporate about it, I think it's very necessary to set the tone at the top, have a code of conduct that clearly defines what is considered inappropriate speech because it's alienating, because it makes people feel actually unprotected in the company. Whatever it may be, it should reflect cultural values that you feel are important. I can't tell private companies what they should do, but every private company really should feel the need to put together a very clear policy so individuals know it's not a subjective basis. I'm not going to censor what you say. However, if you cross a line, and this is clearly written in this policy, it's something that therefore action will be taken.
We'll take, I'll just do two really short questions and then we'll get words of wisdom. The lady with the blue jacket on, and if you can speak loudly.
Okay, is that enough?
That's fine.
Okay, I certainly appreciate the urgency that Trump puts into the discussion on diversity. But what I am looking for guidance for is how we do tackle the longer term issues of discrimination, and particularly in the economy and for business ownership. I work a lot with women and minority owned businesses. And the fastest growing sectors are women of color and minority men, because they feel they have no future in employment. They'll go to middle management, but they're not going to get much further than that. And so I think we've created a cycle where we have some processes that are helping people get in, but in terms of full participation in the Bay Area, in the entrepreneurial community, we don't have that. And so I'm looking for the longer term issues that are systemically economic, and how do we pursue those and not get distracted from them while we have this media giant driving us crazy.
So one of the things I would say in response to that is Trump has given us the freedom to speak out. He's speaking out on the wrong side, but he's speaking out. He's very vocal about racial issues. He's very vocal about his hate. He's very vocal about the groups that he doesn't like. And part of my words of wisdom were going to be, I just challenge everybody in this room to be willing to speak out, and especially if you're not a person of color or if you're not LGBT. Speak out. If you see something that feels wrong, say it. Don't let your friends talk about people who don't look like you in small groups and get away with it. Speak out. That's the only way this is going to change. And he's given us the permission to have the dialogue. I don't want to say he's really giving us permission to do anything, but that's the best way I can articulate it, is that the fact that he's talking about it is allowing us to talk about it on Facebook and in our groups. But if you're in a position of power and you can hire and promote and support minority-owned businesses, don't be afraid to do it, because we know we are, right? If I go and I hire somebody who's African American, I know I'm going to have to explain 10 times harder than if I hire somebody white. That's how we feel. Women feel the same way if they hire other women. We just have to be bold. If you're in a position of power, be bold.
I thought that was a nice segue. If we can get some additional words of wisdom. But do you want to go ahead and respond?
In 1983 in San Francisco, we had a Minority Business Enterprise, Women Business Enterprise Ordinance, which mandated that the city and county of San Francisco give a certain percentage of contracts and subcontracts to people of color and women. That ordinance was knocked out by Proposition 209. Ward Connolly was brilliant in terms of fashioning 209 to make it seem like it was just about universities, but the money behind 209 was from the contractors who wanted to keep 95% of the contracting dollars. Every couple of years we do some polling on whether or not we can rescind Proposition 209. We haven't gotten there yet. As the demographics change, we hope we'll get there where we can have race-conscious contracting. But to me, that's a long-range strategy. I think these companies have an ability to give subcontracts and contracts to people of color and women. I don't think there are any restrictions against that, but we are looking long-term. And it's not, Trump is the immediate problem, but we're looking long-term.
And before we get final closing thoughts, there was one more hand up. I didn't want to leave it. I think, go ahead. You okay? Okay, this lady right here, and then we'll get closing thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to say that I really appreciate the extent to which all of you have devoted your lives to exploring this intense conversation about diversity and discrimination. And I would like to expand it a little bit more, and the reason I'd like to expand it is because I think that one group that isn't being included here are women over the age of 60. You see, you have to understand that when you become a certain age, you kind of become invisible. And, you know, I don't know what it's like to be black and being a woman, but I know what it's like to be over a certain age and start to apply for jobs. And people go, oh, but you know, you don't have this, you don't have that. No, I have a world of experience that nobody's interested in because I'm not 40 or I'm not 50. And so what I think is important is for all of us to take a look at the word discrimination and consider what that means. What it means is exclusivity. And what people do with discrimination is exclude other people so that they can feel superior or have power over another group. And I just think it's important that as a woman who's at a certain age, I would like to be respected, and I would like to be included, and I would like to offer what we have, you know, as women in a business community. And so discrimination isn't just about ethnicity, it isn't just about culture, it isn't just about color. It's about excluding other people who are different from ourselves. So we're all going to get to be a certain age, whether you're male or female, and nobody wants to be discarded. So I just want to open up that conversation to include people who are of a different age, not just a different color. So.
I thought that was a very powerful, powerful statement. Do you have any response to that before we get closing thoughts from anybody on the panel?
I mean, I guess the one thing I appreciate the comments and I agree. The one thing I think is lacking is we talk about how diverse teams will produce better results, and I think we hope that people will believe that and act on it. I think we could do a better job at raising, you know, maybe it's a PR matter, it's a communications matter, but real case studies where diverse teams have delivered. And when people are generally followers, companies are certainly followers. Everybody's looking at what the competition is doing, and then they look at it and decide whether it works for them. And I just feel like if we had better case studies, very public and visible, showing the good results that come from diverse teams, I think more companies could look at themselves and ask themselves, what can we do to achieve those types of results? And it'll lead to them thinking about their workforce.
So we're going to get closing thoughts, and we'll start on my very far left. Ira, would you like to have some words of wisdom for the audience as we close out?
I think really what's been echoed by this whole panel so far, which is that we all need to have our eyes wide open. We all need to be outspoken. None of us have the liberty of saying that I can't make a change, whether it's small, whether it's mentoring just a few people, or whether it's much bigger, volunteering, doing some major action, writing to your congressman, for goodness sakes. You know, and in California, we feel very safe, but there's many, many people that don't in many parts of the country. I think that the discussion to open up diversity, I think Willie's making a fantastic point, which is data points for which companies can actually economically benefit from diversity initiatives is the direction we need to go. Because I can speak forever about how, you know, for example, the dilemma amongst the Asian American population is that we don't rise to management positions because we don't have the qualifications of a leader. We are not outspoken enough, we're not aggressive enough, we don't argue enough, and all these different characteristics that are deemed to be the soft skills necessary to be a manager. You know, there's an education there. There's somewhat of this is ignorance, implicit bias sometimes may be based on ignorance. we are all empowered to go and change these implicit biases by being the people that are the good leaders and by having a voice that matters.
Lily?
I guess my final thought is maybe on a positive note. Despite all of the setbacks that we're experiencing right now, and I believe everything that has been said tonight, and you've made some really good points about what we are facing. In the long run, I think we're still heading in the right direction. We hosted an event not too long ago at Hewlett-Packard, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson was there. I mean, he's seen every obstacle, he's seen every challenge, and his parting words were, "Stay optimistic." I mean, he walked us through our history. The country was founded at a time where slavery was legal. We went through violent history fighting for civil rights. Today, our conversations are about implicit bias, explicit bias. They're much different today, and the challenges I think we're facing are very, very real. But we are heading in the right direction. And here's where I'm most encouraged. The corporate world is demanding diversity like they have never demanded it before. And I believe it. I think they're as genuine as they've ever been. They are putting their money, their time, their people, and their energy towards building a more diverse workforce. And I think we can look to what's happening in the engineering community over the last 10 years as a great example. The tech companies, it's not happening fast enough, and they're going to be criticized for many years to come for not having enough diversity. But if you look at the infrastructure they've put in place to build programs for the youth, girls coding, they have a number of scholarship organizations out there dedicated to STEM programs in low-income and minority communities. They are building the pipeline. The next generation of engineers will be more diverse than the last one, and it's because they're making it happen through that type of an investment. And I think in the legal community, I think we're behind. I don't think that we're reaching deep enough into the pipeline, and we need to find ways to reach kids sooner. For those of you who may know where I spend most of my time outside of the office, it's with high school kids through a couple different programs. And our goal is to bring the legal community, the corporate community, to engage with high school kids because they are the next generation. But we're the best resource for them, but we have to make ourselves available to them in order for it to work. And so just like they're doing in the engineering community with that active engagement and helping them move along in the pipeline, I think now is the time for us to actively engage with them at an earlier age. And ultimately, that'll be our legacy.
Thank you. Eva?
I've got some studies for you that talk about the fact that a diverse workforce is more effective. There's a whole concept called racial anxiety, and it shows that when people are more comfortable in a diverse group, their cortisol level goes down and their cognitive abilities go up. I'll get you those studies. It's about the holiday time. Some of you are going to be going home and you're going to be talking to people who think everything that we've been saying is utter hogwash. And so one thing you all can do is not attack people, but bring different views to bear, because that's how people change their attitudes. People that they respect and trust say things that make them think. They may not turn their views around right away, but I think you can have a big influence. I focused on Trump, but a lot of people like him, think he's fabulous. So if you know any of those people, please talk to them and over turkey and just give them little doses of different information. I'm really quite serious about that because I went to college supporting the war in Vietnam, got turned around by talking to people. So that's how change comes about. So, and I totally support what Yolanda says. People of color have got to stand up and talk too. It's important that the two of you talk to people at your firm and said, the police brutality is on me too. And so people go, oh, you, oh my goodness. So it's important to share your stories. So that's what I'd say.
And David?
I know I shouldn't have followed Eva.
You have a ring. Yeah, just pull out the ring. Don't forget that you're supposed to be talking.
I I think racism is very resilient, and I personally do not believe that diversity by sheer numbers necessarily brings positive change. I actually think that it's the inclusion piece of that. It's diverse populations and diverse people when they have power, when they are empowered. That brings about the change. Because racism is very resilient. They can increase numbers while still decreasing effectiveness of voice. So when you have power, wield it. And in using your power, understand your own implicit bias that you may have, and always be willing to examine yourself in ways in which you may be excluding when you're not consciously doing so. So that would be mine.
And Yolanda?
So one final thing, kind of pulling off the holiday conversation stories and people who may be sitting in the room thinking, I can't have a conversation about how people should resist attitudes about racism, sexism, homosexuality fears. But think about, I've heard a ton of these stories, and I know that you have too, about the parents who did not support gay rights until they found out their child was gay. Mm-hmm. And they had a completely different conversation. Mm-hmm. The white daughter who brought home the black son-in-law, mm-hmm. right? And then all of a sudden you had to shift your thinking if you were going to keep a relationship with your daughter. Mm-hmm. Having a child with a disability. Again, you probably could have cared less about ADA rights until you had to face it yourself. And then finally, many, many men who are managing partners of big firms now who had a different perspective on equal pay and promotions when they had a daughter come home and say, I didn't get that job. Mm-hmm. So it's doable. You don't have to be directly impacted by it to change your thinking. You just have to be bold and brave. The last thing I'll say is there's a handout on the table where you came in. It's called the Personal Action List to eliminate bias and racism. Take one with you and read it with your partner, spouse, and just kind of walk through what you might do differently to get more comfortable with helping to be a part of this change, no matter what you look like.
Let's give a hand for our amazing
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Parents and leadership. Thank you.
Honored.